Tape 2, Side A.
When he went, no, wasn't at Muriel wasn't 16 when he went to Washington representing the Independent Dealers Association on writing the regulations for the NRA. And he met Harry Sinclair while he was in Washington. Now Harry Sinclair was a Sinclair Oil Company, the president and founder of it. And he so impressed him that he got a job
Doing?
selling petroleum products for the Sinclair Oil Company.
I used to go with him. Right.
Yeah, you did. You used to drive Franklin.
Well, then we had that little Dodge convertible. It had the rumble seat.
Is that what had the rumble seat?
We riding the rumble seat.
Oh, I love that.
I didn't know he had a Dodge Rumble. We had a Dodge, but it was a sedan.
No, we had a rumble seat.
We had a rumble seat.
Yeah.
Well, that was the Franklin with the rumble seat. That was the Franklin. I'm quite sure that's Franklin. I remember it. He wouldn't have anything but a Franklin.
Franklin was too big. This is small.
Because we used to have these 7-passenger Franklins.
What?
Yeah,
I
that
know.
was after. After our rumble seat.
I don't remember. The only rumble seat I remember was the Franklin. And I remember that damn lid went down on her when he put on the brake one time. They had to get out and open it up and see.
Oh, is that what happened to you?
Oh, gee. Okay.
Edgar, back up. After he lost his railroad job,
He went
He
into the
sold-
garage business.
all right, the garage.
Then he sold
Then he sold the books. And then what happened?
Got in the gasoline business.
Oh,
Sinclair.
he ran a filling
This
station.
filling station.
Well, where was it?
1921. Washington Boulevard.
Oh, on the Washington Boulevard.
She went into the gasoline business too. I don't want to tell you about that.
No, not now. Let's stay with this.
I don't know what he's talking about.
You remember? You had 2 kids down there in Dundalk in the gasoline station. I used to have to go down and run that damn thing on weekends, but they didn't repair radio.
He wasn't very happy.
I know he was. Dan and Mara lived at the house for a while, and just I don't know where everybody slept.
Mother's house?
With all of us.
With all of us? And Myrtle and
And she took Myrtle. They took Myrtle's bedroom. I don't know where Myrtle slept. I don't remember at all.
was she married?
No.
She was single. In the attic. We had an attic.
Anyway, Sinclair, I ran the station when Dad was selling Sinclair products. Kept me out of school. I was only in third year of high school. And I stayed out of high school. And come Thanksgiving, the Sowers had died, who owned the service station. His son took it over and he raised the rent. And I told Dad, I said, we can't afford this. I think he raised it from $21 to about $30 a month, something like that. I said, we can't afford to do that. We don't sell that much gasoline. We sold 100 gallons of gasoline a day. We were doing good. We got 4 cents a gallon profit. You made your money on grease jobs, and flat tires, and incident. The 4 cents, would take care of expenses. And what you did other than that is what your profit was. Anyway, he said, okay, we got out. And I'm home. And this was after Thanksgiving. And one morning, I'm upstairs. He called me downstairs. He said, now, you got a decision to make. He said, you can go out and get yourself a job, but you got to get a job, or you can go back to high school. And I said, well, I stayed out of high school not on my own. I said, okay, I'll go back. So I went over to school and told them I wanted to get back in. Well, I wasn't too sharp with English anyhow. And they said, well, you can pick up and everything, but now English, you'll go to 2 classes. Yeah, I went to Miss Johnson.
Oh, she had me.
I think, yeah, Miss Davis was.
And she had all the kids, and I was class 1. I remember her.
Yeah. Oh, Davis was. I think she had screw loose.
Maybe.
So I picked up. I graduated that. And I was bottom half of class. I wanted to go to college. And the only place I could go to college was, if I'd have gone to Maryland, they'd have kicked me out, I'm pretty sure. So I went to Blue Ridge, and hell, there was only 24 of us in the place up there.
And Blue Ridge College went bankrupt because the only students they had there were state scholarship students that paid for your tuition, board and tuition. They weren't making enough money to pay their teachers. So,
Yeah, they only paid a teacher $500 a year and board.
You know, there are several things here that I remember that I'd like to kind of get in. Myra, I know that you were in high school and you kept telling me that you had to come home and take care. Mother made.
that was tragic.
You were going to college.
Yeah, she
Or
worked
wanted
as
to
a
go.
waitress.
Okay.
How about that?
I don't know what you mean.
North Avenue, you worked
Oh, well, that was after I was out. Yeah, this is a sad thing. Sad thing about my plans for life. I got a scholarship to Blue Ridge, and things were so bad at home. And Emily was born. I guess that was going.
1930.
1930. All right, I graduated in 29. So this must have been my second year in college. And Emily was born around Halloween time.
October.
And Mother told me I had to come home and run the house while she was in the hospital with Emily. So that meant I lost a good week and a half. In those days, you stayed in the hospital for
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
14 days.
Mm-hmm.
So I was there. And I remember when Mother was going to come home from the hospital, she sent a list of clothes that she wanted to wear to come home in. It was cold, she needed a winter coat. So I go up in the trunk and I pull out a tan Melton coat, which was kind of
You
wrinkly.
mean Newton or Matson?
It was Melton. It was like a felt type, that felt cloth, a heavy cloth that you make into coats. But it was kind of wrinkly, but it was the only coat I could find, so I sent that in. And she told me later, she said, I was so humiliated to wear that coat out of the hospital. Why didn't you send me your coat? Never dawned on me.
Oh my goodness. Is this the same trunk she still had?
Yeah.
Big, huge.
Where is
steamer?
that trunk now? Who got it?
Big, huge, beautiful steamer trunk.
They had that.
Love crawling in that thing, looking for all the old stuff.
They had-
old dolls you and Muriel had.
They had that from Canada, from their travels in Canada.
So what happened in college?
Well, I missed out 2 weeks in the beginning. But then Danton gave me a ring. Now, his family, when his father died, and like all farmers, you get a heart problem, you just wear yourself out. And he died at 54.
Dan was how old?
Danton was,
Late
no,
early
let's see
20s.
how old he was. I was 16 going into college. There's 8 years difference between us.
Mm-hmm.
So he was 26. And he had only had 3 years of high school. So when they moved into town, his younger sister, Grace, and I were the same age. She was entering her senior year from Union Bridge. And so she was in our class, and then Danton told his mother, who had been a school teacher, that he wanted to come finished high school, and she was so happy. But since they lived right across the street from me, Danton I was always on sport teams, and he was always the sport managers. So he was always furnishing his car, and he would carry the girls' team with him. Well, the girls made me sit up front. I wasn't very happy about that. So I was pushed with him. And of course, I guess he liked me anyway. And he started asking me for dates. I really wasn't that happy going out on, but just because he asked me, I went. And then different ones would have to tell me what a wonderful fellow he was. Well, I didn't think he was so wonderful. I thought he was sort of effeminate.
Quiet.
Yeah, he never really had much to say. And he had, you know how movie stars used to wear these long sideburns? And he had long sideburns, and I hated him. He was good looking, but I didn't like those long sideburns. But anyway, he'd always ask me out Saturday night. We'd go to a movie. And he'd always take me in to the, and have an ice cream soda or Sunday afterwards. So it was very nice. But anyway, eventually, I guess I began to grow to like him quite much. And I can't say I was in love with him. I never had bells go off or anything like that. But he gave me a ring for my second year in college, my 18th birthday. Well, in thinking about what I wanted to do, since I lived with school teachers, it seemed like this was a congregation for school teachers. And they would come in and complain about how hard they had to work. In those days, you could not be married. And they would talk about correcting the papers and all the different responsibilities they had to do beside their teaching. And I remember a vice principal shaking her finger at me one time and saying, Myra, whatever you do, don't you ever be a school teacher. Well, that's what I wanted to be. So I take her advice. And this is why it's so important what you say to younger children, how much of an impression you make on their minds. So I thought, well, in those days, what can I do? Well, women either went to teach or took a secretarial course or went into nursing. So I decided I didn't want to. I always had it in my head, if you took a secretarial course, that was for people who weren't very smart. And I wanted to stick with academic work. So I thought, I'll go in training. Well, I was getting out of high school at 16. What are you going to do till you're 18? So I applied for a scholarship to Blue Ridge. And I got the scholarship, and I kept on living with the Wilsons. By that time, when I first went to live with Wilsons, Dad was getting them something for my board and room. But when things got so tight at home, they were giving me a very little bit of spending money. I know Mr. Charlie would come home. He was a traveling salesman for farm machinery, and he'd reach in his pocket and give me some change. So I really didn't have much in that way going to school. Mother would send me clothes, or she'd buy me some things. And then Miss Vanny occasionally, who taught sewing and had retired at Blue Ridge. So she would make me a dress or two. But that's how I got through school with clothes.
Well,
But anyway, when I graduated, well, I had this ring. And that summer, before I was to go into Union Memorial, because they had accepted me, Miss Vanny had a stroke, so they asked me to stay up there with them and run the house, which I did. Well, then Danton across the street, we would see each other every evening. And I get this letter from Mother about 2 weeks before I'm to go into training. Don't want you to go into training. I had my uniforms ordered, which I had paid for working. And she said, I need your help. And I cried for 2 days. Danton didn't know how to console me. Miss Fanny didn't know how to console me. But being the good little girl, I went home. I didn't rebel. Because she said, you'll only get married when you get out, which was true. Danton said that he'd wait for me. And so I went home. I walked the streets for a job. Finally found a job in a sandwich shop across from Mercy Hospital. It was an Italian restaurant, a deli more or less, for $4 a week. And that's when all the banks were closing. Nobody had any money. You might get a nickel tip occasionally.
1930, I was born.
No, I was out of college. This was 31.
She'd come home and take care of me.
31.
Me and Lloyd and Charles.
Yeah.
Yeah, the whole shebang. But Muriel had the brunt of it because I was only there a short while, but she had to continue.
How long?
Sandwich shop.
Yeah,
This-
how long were you there?
Well, then there was one of the girls who had a sister that worked in a restaurant up on North Avenue in Charles. And the salary was a little more, but the tips were a lot better. So I got a job up there at the North End. But through this, and then after 2 years, Stanton would come down on the weekends. Well, eventually, he would say, I wanted to wait until I was 20 to be married. And I was married a week after I was 20. But it became harder and harder. If I would go up there and spend a weekend, he'd bring me down Monday morning to go to work.
It's tough to come back.
Yeah. And it became harder for me to leave him. And I would be way down here. And finally he said, we just got to get married. So then we made the arrangements then to get married. And I didn't know I was pregnant. We'd only had one intimate contact. So I've never said anything about it, but the dates are here and you know it. But being a Church of the Brethren, in those days when women sinned, so-called, and they were the victims, they had to get up in front of the congregation and apologize.
Scarlet letter.
Tell them that they had sinned and done wrong. Well,
How would they know if you didn't tell them?
well, the baby.
Because you're like this.
Oh, are you? I mean, were you that?
Yeah, of course.
She was.
I said after one intimate, and that was very quick
It was, you were
because we knew that it was wrong.
Right.
You couldn't hide it.
No. Well, I didn't even know it when I was married.
Yeah.
I was 3 months, but I didn't know it. And Mother did take me to the doctor. She worried because I wasn't menstruating, and I wouldn't admit this escapade. So,
But you didn't have to go in front of the church. You didn't.
no, but what I had was a delegation that came in to visit me, and
For this.
before this, it was 2 women, and the man was the person that married me, my favorite teacher,
Oh boy.
who was a minister. But he sympathized with me, but
He was
yet
kind.
this was something, he was very kind. And when they came in, when they came in to visit me, one of the women was Dr. Bixler's sister, Mrs. Engler, and then there was her sister-in-law, too, that came in. But they just came in, dropped in one afternoon as a visit, just to visit, and they asked me if I had anything to say, and I knew what they were aiming for. I hadn't heard that they do this, but so I told them, I said, well, the only thing that I had to say was that I had gotten married. That my baby was born 6 months after I had been married. And then I said, would you like to see him? So I went upstairs and got him out of his bed and brought him down, and they enjoyed him. But Dan's oldest sister, Dorothy, who's never married, was home at that time. So after my callers left, then I went in and I told her what it was. And she said, well, are you truly sorry?
What did you say? What did you say?
Well, I don't know, but it was
Pretty humiliating.
it was humiliating.
Well, Mara, was it just the female that had to get up and apologize?
Well, that's just it. I
Where
said
was
they
the
were
male?
they were the victim.
Yes.
Oh, yes, it was.
Where was the male in all of this?
Here this is on.
I don't care. Look at the way those people had to live.
Yeah.
We don't have to do that.
I've never shared this with my family.
Fine. This is wonderful. Oh, I love it because
Yeah.
Well, you can see how far
We've come.
the church has come.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you know,
Because then I was talking to Catholic friends, and I shared this with them. They said, "But you got married."
and you were committed in your relationship.
Yes.
You knew you were going to
Yeah.
be married, and there was love.
And the funny thing was, after Dayton asked me to marry him, and as I say, I can't say I was head over heels in love with him. The only thing I said to him, I said, "Well, Dayton, don't make me go out and live on a farm," because we had such a hard experience growing up on that other farm. And he said, "No, I don't intend to," because he didn't like to work with horses. He had the privilege of taking that farm over from his father, who had a business selling registered Holstein cows and registered Hampshire hogs.
Oh, yeah.
And there was an income coming on, and all he had to do was step in and take over. But he was a mechanical man. His parents had sent him to a mechanic school out in Kansas City, where he learned radio work. And so what he did in town was to repair radios. He worked for a fellow that sold them. He built aerials for people.
is that where Jack gets it?
When we were, and Dayton had an amateur radio station of his own with call letters 3ALV, W3AL. No, that was Charlie's. W3ALV. Now, I learned when he died that when you had the early number, which was 3, and the first letter of the alphabet, you were coming in on the ground floor of call letters for amateur radio, ham radio.
Dick knows that because that's what he did, didn't you? Were you amateur? Oh, your brother Hank?
Well, when we got married, we moved in to the house in town across the street from Miss Fanny and Miss Edna. And Dayton's younger sister, Grace, who graduated in their high school class, was dating Charles Newsbaum. Well, they made plans to be married on her birthday. My birthday was January the 12th. We were married the 19th. Grace and Charles were married on her birthday, which was January the 24th. So the 4 of us lived together. His mother and his youngest sister were out in Arizona because his younger sister had asthma, and they took her out for her health.
That's Sally.
No, that was
Oh,
Mary.
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 Sally didn't have the asthma. Mary did.
But Sally graduated from normal school the same year that I graduated from high school and had a teaching job. She taught in a one-room schoolhouse there in Carroll County, but she went out to Arizona and she taught out there. So that's why she got out there in Arizona. But Charles, after Charles and Grace found an apartment of their own, Dayton would go out to the farm, which had been rented out, and do jobs around there. And there was always the pump wouldn't run. They had a Delco battery system for electricity. And
This is the farm, the
this is
Ensor farm.
the Ensor farm, which had been in the family since 1874. And 1874. And bought it from the Devil Bists, who were people that had gotten a land grant from the King of England back in the 1770s. So, 1770s. And Danton's father bought the farm in 1870. Yeah. Carroll County, well, up in that part of Maryland, wasn't developed. It wasn't developed until in the late 1700s, but southern Maryland was developed in the 1600s, and the eastern shore. But Danton came home. Oh, Danton would send statements out every month to people whose work he had done. But nobody had any money at that time. So we weren't getting paid. And Danton came in from the farm one day and he said, you know, if we moved down on the farm, we'd at least have something to eat. Well, so that was the only reason. By that time...
Wait a minute. Dan, when he was with Sinclair, I don't know whether he bought the station or not, but this is one that...
Oh, you're going to tell that.
No,
right after we... Yeah, all right.
And they... Mara had 2 kids.
No, I only had one.
Second one
John.
Away.
John was 35.
You had to have one on the way then.
Yeah.
And they would spend, they only had about 3, 4 folks down there. We were making money.
This was down near Dundalk.
Yeah, Dundalk. It was on Hollenberg Avenue. And they would go back to New Windsor on the weekends to fix radios. And I would go over and I'd run the thing for Saturday. We didn't open it on Sunday. And I would run that thing on Saturday. And that happened, I don't know how long that ran.
Well, through the winter.
Yeah.
And then
I
David
was
said,
there in the summertime too.
well, that was through the summer. That was, well, John was born June the 3rd in 35. And it was in the fall that Dad bought this station for us.
They stayed on, and then we had the farm. And I used to go with Dan out to the farm too when they had the tenant on it. And I painted, that was 1934.
Yeah. We moved out on the farm the spring of 35, and Jim was born in July.
Yeah.
And Mark, tell us about the farm. No electricity?
Oh, well, I felt very privileged to move out on that farm once we decided that that's what we would do, because there was electricity in the house, there was a telephone, there was water in the house, there was a bathroom, and I could drive a car. So we were wealthy as far as our neighbors, because a lot of the women didn't drive cars.
When we lived on the farm, we had coal lamps.
Kerosene lamps.
We had to carry water. Every drop of water we used, we had to carry from the spring, which is about 100 yards away.
No telephone.
And no telephone. An outhouse that was about 100 yards away, too. And
So this new, the Ensor farm is wonderful.
Mother cooked on a cook stove. She had an old cook stove. We had it, and the living room had a furnace in there, a stove.
Oh, a heater.
Yeah.
A room heater.
But
that burned kerosene.
You'd have to come downstairs in the morning, dressed in the wintertime.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know, Mara, at the farm, you did have to go down to the spring to keep the food cold.
Well, for the first year, we had no refrigeration. And then Danton bought a refrigerator. We didn't dare put it in the kitchen because the heat from the cook stove would make it run more, so it was placed in the dining room. But for that first year, we carried food down and put it in the spring house. And it was a problem to me how to keep the baby's milk sweet through the summer. And the only one was to put it down in the spring house. So at 2 o'clock in the morning, when the babies woke up for their bottle, go down and get. But that was in the summertime. Yeah. Ooh. But then we...
nursed him, you wouldn't have had to do that.
Well, I tried. Heavens, I nursed Johnny for 6 weeks. He had this yellow jaundice, his eyes were yellow, and he wasn't gaining, and he cried. And the doctor said, leave him at the breast. Well, I would. Then every 4 hours, then every 3 hours, then every 2 hours. There was always milk in my breast, but I was a poor cow.
When enough for him.
I had the milk, but it didn't satisfy him. The minute we put him on a bottle at 6 weeks, he went to sleep and I never heard any more out of him. Then for Ruth, I tried for a whole month. That girl, when she was doing the same thing. So when she was a month old, we put her on a bottle. Well, hardly would that bottle be down. The whoop, we'd have a fountain out of there. So I had to prepare the formula with lime water. Then, of course, we were out on the farm when Jimmy was born. I didn't have time to nurse. So we just started him right out on the bottle. But then when David came along 5 years later, born with a hair lip and cleft palate, he wouldn't have been able to have nursed anyway. But Dr. Marsh took him right away down to the University of Maryland. And that's another story because the cosmetologist at that time that Maryland was using, Dr. Bay, who was very well known, very skilled, had died that spring. And Dave was born in March. So Dr. Marsh had said, when he came to practice in the New Windsor area, there was a little 3-year-old girl that nothing had ever been done. And he said, I made a vow that any of my babies would be taken care of immediately. So they took Dave down to the hospital. We'd go down occasionally, and in those days, nurseries didn't have the picture windows. You asked to see a child. The nurse would come with her mask on, holding the baby in her arm. You would stand there at the door, and all I wanted to do was hold that baby in my arms, and the nurse would pull away. The sad thing was they couldn't find any doctor to do the operation. At those times, we didn't have a hospital in Carroll County, and you either went to Baltimore or up to Gettysburg or to Frederick. But Dr. Marsh took his patients to Baltimore. Every time he'd go down with a patient, he'd stop in to see David. And finally, he said, if you don't find somebody to do this baby, I'll do it myself. So they finally brought a doctor over from Hopkins, a Dr. Kitlowski, a Polish doctor, who was one of the most famous on the East Coast. And he did Dave's operation. But the nurses had made such a pet of him that when he smiled, he tore the stitches apart. So they had to redo it. So we got him home at 5 months. I have to take that back. He was born in March. All right. And this was July, I guess, going into August. And when we got him from the hospital, you could see 2 little points in each of his cheeks where they put a brace to keep the lips together. And the doctor was so proud of that surgery because the nose had been, the split extended up around the side of the nose, up around the curve. And he did a beautiful job and matched the lips. So they had to take a picture of that. And then we went on home. We went out to Mother's for dinner. And then brought him on home. And he had never bonded with anybody as a child. And I know in our long drives, either coming and going to Baltimore, or we would go on up to Harrisburg then to visit with Grace and Charlie. In the long rides, Dave never went to sleep. He'd sit on my lap. He just didn't fit. He didn't know how to snuggle. And finally, within 10 minutes of getting back to the farm, he might be to sleep, but you fought with him that much. But I was instructed then to massage the scars so that it would be soft, which I did very faithfully. And David then had to have another operation to repair the cleft in the palate. So Dr. Kitlowski did all his operations at Union, children's operations at Union Memorial. And so we took him down to Union Memorial. But before they did the cleft, they had to take the tonsils out. So two months later, in February, we take him down for the palate. And when we went to Mother's again, and we picked him up and came out to Mother's, she had dinner for us. And by that time, the nurses had weaned him from the bottle that he was drinking out of the cup. The problem with him was that as he would suck, there was an opening this was after his operation. He would get liquid that would come out through a hole that hadn't been closed up in the palate. It would come out his nostrils. But because of the soreness in the palate, we had been giving him a big black nipple, which was very soft. So when we took him down for the palate operation, they took him away from that and weaned him so that he drank out of a cup. And he was about 11 months old. He was born in March. This was in January that he had an operation. So then as he matured, I guess when he was 20, he went back and Dr. Kitlowski tried to close that hole up, but it didn't get closed. There's too much scar tissue there. And then later on, there was an Ensor cousin who worked at Johns Hopkins Hospital. They was in college by this time. And she said they had a cleft palate clinic. And so we took him down to the clinic, and he went to see the dentist because his teeth didn't grow in right. We went to a hearing because he was, this one side of his face was beside the palate. His ears were affected and his eyes were affected. And so, as I say, Dr. Kitlowski, he would manage to close that hole up. We went to the clinic a year later, and they got the hole closed. So, in talking to the surgeon, who was a young doctor from India, told us what he did. Inside the lip, you have that little skin, which is called a frenulum, and all he did was pull that up through the hole and fasten it inside, and that did the work. And but when Hopkins got in touch with Kitlowski to get his records, we hadn't told Kitlowski what we were doing. And I found that, he wasn't very happy with that. But Dr. Morris had suggested, we didn't have the money to pay Kitlowski for the original operation, that if we would send him a ham, that would help pay for it. We sent him a ham every Easter until Dave was 16 years old. And we would get nice little notes from him. So he did have an interest in Dave, and we were wrong in not consulting him. Yeah.
That's interesting. We need to get back to the family history here, where I said that there were several things.
It's going to come to the
I
end.
had questions about. When did Dad and Albert have the tractor truck accident?
All right. He was still.
With Sinclair?
He was still with Sinclair. And there was a man over church, two men over church. And he would run the coal route. Bootleg coal in those days. Because the miners didn't have any work, they used to mine the coal on their own and sell it. And that didn't go through the union. And although the mine was on company property, they would still mine this coal, and they would sell it to trucks that came up from Baltimore. $3.50 a ton. They paid for it, and you take the Baltimore, and you could get $7 a ton for it. And Ed Hunter did that.
Now, what year was this? This was Sinclair year.
16.
I was young enough to remember this accident.
Now wait a minute. I was in high school. I was senior in high school, I guess. This happened maybe about when I was a junior. This is probably when that happened. That would have been 1934.
I was 4 years old, I remember.
And then they decided, well, he was only making one-way trips, go up to Cole and come back down. He said, why not take freight up in the coal truck to up in Scranton area? So they did. Now, in order to do that, they needed a permit from the ICC to cross state lines.
What I was doing, this was.
And they got a permit. And that permit took care of all of Northeast and all of Virginia and out to past Pennsylvania. A tremendous territory. But he needed to get a company then. And this company, they picked the name Blue Ridge Cargo. Was the name of the company. And the officer in there was Ed Hunter was president. And the other guy from church was Allender, Carlton Allender. And then there was Dad, and Dad got a hold of Nevins. I forget his name, but that was, you remember Francis Nevins. It used to be in the Boy Scouts down there in Lansdowne. And Charles Blewett was in there when they were Boy Scouts. His father, he worked in the Navy Yard. And he just put some money in it, all that matters too. And Dad put money in it. And those other two men were the operators. And Carlton Allender had some, I guess he had some experience in cargo, hauling. And so they had about 3 trucks. And they would solicit cargo to go up in central Pennsylvania. And then when they delivered up there and the truck was empty, they'd go to the mine and get coal and come back. It was a lucrative business. And also they used to, well, it was a paper, they hauled paper goods up to West Virginia, Halltown, West Virginia. Still making paper forwarded up there, and they haul right there. That's where. And then I got to riding as an assistant driver, and I would ride with them. And Francis Nevins was the same age as I was, but he was a mechanic in the shop. We used to go up once in a while when they were street drivers, and we would drive up to Scranton or Reading, around there. But what happened to that? Well, the war came along. Yeah. This is 40. And they couldn't get trucks. And they still held a franchise. And I remember Dad selling part of that franchise to an outfit in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. But if he could have held on, and the trucking company, before it finally was, they took the license away from them because they were renting trucks, which you could do now, and putting the Blue Ridge emblem on it. And all they had was Blue Ridge. The company, you had to own your own, at that time you had to own your own trucks in order to satisfy the ICC. And that lasted all during the war. It wasn't until after the war that this thing folded. They took the license away from them. But if they could have hung on to that thing, it'd have been more than $1 million operation even in those days.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, it seems like
during the war, Ed Hunter even stopped and Carlton Allender who was one who run it during the war. Ed Hunter went down to Fort Belvoir and he taught auto mechanics to school down there for the Army. He did that to the
Yeah, but now listen, they
They
were,
were in school afterwards.
What
for
Emily
CIs.
what Emily was asking
Now,
about.
all right, you're about the accident. Well, when they were short drivers one time, it was Christmas time or something like that. Albert didn't drive much, but they were on the road. I don't know where they were going.
They were going to Harrisburg. I know right where it was that they had their accident.
Where was
It's some reason or other in passing and pulling back on the road, the
Where?
truck fishtail, and there were some rocks here at the side, and they banged up against the
Where
rocks.
was it?
I can't tell you now anymore because they have a new road.
So I know, but you can
If I-
find an old road now.
Yeah,
you
but
don't
I
know.
can't tell
But
you.
anyway, what happened was that Dad went along with Albert. And the two of them were up the road. Dad wasn't driving at the time. What happened, I don't know. But anyway, Dad reached over and took the wheel away from Albert. And he was sitting in the right seat. And they lost control.
Yeah, the load shifted in the back of the